heap size and rough estimates of how many centuries a given site was worked, which is why the figures in circulation range so widely and why serious archaeologists tend to treat any single number as an order of magnitude rather than an exact account. The uncertainty does not erase the puzzle. It just means the honest version of this story carries a wide margin of error sitting right at its center, rather than a tidy figure that would make for a cleaner headline. Some of it traveled a very long way. Trace element and lead isotope analysis, comparing the chemical signature of Lake Superior copper against artifacts recovered from Hopewell earthwork sites in the Ohio Valley, including the ceremonial copper breastplates and effigy cutouts excavated from Mound City near Chillicothe, has confirmed that finished copper objects moved along exchange routes stretching well over 1,000 miles from where they were originally pulled out of the ground. Copper recovered from mound sites in the lower Mississippi Valley has returned similar isotopic signatures, meaning a raw nugget pulled out of a pit on Isle Royale or the Keweenaw could travel the length of 2 or 3 modern states, changing hands an unknown number of times, before it was finally hammered into a bracelet or a ceremonial ornament and buried with someone who likely never saw the lake it came from. That is evidence of a trade network in continuous operation centuries before any European charted the interior of the continent, run by people who had never met the mining engineers who would later be startled to find their own claims already worked out. Some of it was almost certainly melted down and reworked, generation folding into generation, recasting the same metal into new tools until the archaeological trail of any single piece disappears into whatever it became next. And some portion, nobody can put a confident number on how large, may simply be sitting undisturbed in pits and cache sites across Isle Royale and the Keweenaw that have never once been formally surveyed. That last possibility is not just speculation. Archaeologists at Michigan Technological University have spent recent seasons flying LiDAR over sections of Isle Royale, mapping the forest floor beneath the canopy, in a level of detail no 19th century surveyor with a notebook and a compass could have managed. And the scans keep finding pits that no company ledger, no Whittlesey report, and no modern park map had ever recorded. The count of known workings goes up almost every time somebody looks harder, and no full-scale, ground-penetrating radar survey of the island has ever been funded. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The people who actually mined it were, for most of the 19th century, the last people anyone in a position of institutional authority wanted to credit with it. Wisconsin naturalist Increase Lapham had already documented ancient copper workings and earthworks across the state in his 1855 survey for the Smithsonian, and when the engineer and amateur geologist Charles Whittlesey surveyed the Isle Royale pits and published his own findings through the institution in 1863, he documented the cribwork, the stone hammers, and the operational scale of the ancient workings in more detail than anyone had before him. Whittlesey, a former Army topographical engineer, who later helped found the Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland, brought a surveyor's precision to the work that most of his contemporaries lacked, mapping individual pit dimensions and recording the species and estimated age of the trees growing through spoil heaps at multiple sites. He argued, in his own considered judgment as an engineer who had measured the work firsthand, that the ancestors of the people living in the region were entirely capable of producing it, without needing to invoke any vanished outside population. His report did not settle the question in the popular imagination, and in some circles it did not settle it at all. Newspapers and amateur antiquarian societies of the period preferred a different account, one in which the pits had been dug by a vanished people wholly unconnected to any living nation, sometimes described as wandering Toltecs, sometimes as a lost race of mound builders imagined as distinct from, and superior to, the Ojibwe and Menominee, who were, at that very moment, being pressured off the land the pits sat under through treaty after treaty. The theory served a purpose that went beyond archaeology. It let the extraction of an entire ancient industry, and increasingly the extraction of the land itself, proceed without the complication of acknowledging whose ancestors had actually built it. That impulse eventually produced outright fraud. Beginning around 1890, a Michigan land speculator named Daniel Soper and an associate named James Scotford began planting forged artifacts, inscribed slate and copper tablets carved with invented alphabets meant to resemble Old World Hebrew and Egyptian script, in mounds and gravel pits across the lower peninsula. The so-called Michigan relics circulated for decades, promoted by people eager for physical proof that someone other than the region's native nations had built its ancient sites, before archaeologist Richard Stamps demonstrated conclusively, through tool mark and context analysis published in the 1980s and 90s,